Today we return to the United States in the latter half of the 19th century, to a city shaped by war and recovery, industry and immigration. Philadelphia in the early 1860s was a place of constant movement. Soldiers passed through its streets in great numbers. Factories worked day and night to supply the Union cause, and hospitals overflowed with the wounded and the dying. Yet for all the noise and urgency of the Civil War years, daily life continued in quieter corners of the city, particularly in the working-class neighborhoods where families struggled not for glory, but for survival. It was here in 1862 that Mary Mormon was born. Her birth came during one of the most turbulent periods in American history, yet she would grow up just beyond the shadow of the conflict itself. By the time she was 3 years old, the war had ended, the armies had disbanded, and the city began the slow work of returning to something resembling peace. Mary lived with her parents and 4 older siblings at 1246 Orange Street, a modest home in a densely populated district where families lived close together and neighbors knew one another well. Her father was a shoemaker, a trade that demanded long hours and steady hands but offered little wealth. Her mother remained at home, tending to the children and managing the household as so many women of her class did. In 1866, when Mary was only 4 years old, her father died, leaving the family suddenly without its primary source of income. His death altered the course of their lives in ways that were both immediate and lasting. Mary's mother became a widow, forced to rely on the labor and cooperation of her older children to keep the household afloat. Despite these hardships, Mary grew into a child remembered fondly by nearly everyone who encountered her. She was small for her age, fair-haired and gentle in manner. Neighbors referred to her as Little Mary Mormon, a name that reflected both her youth and the affection she inspired. She was known to follow her mother closely, to greet familiar faces with ease, and to play quietly on the front steps of her home with other children from the street. In an era before structured schooling for children her age, her world was defined by the narrow boundaries of her neighborhood. She rarely wandered far, and those who lived nearby believed they would always know where she was. On Sunday, the 6th of September in 1868, Mary's mother prepared to attend church. She had intended to bring Mary along, but as the hour approached, she decided the service might be too long and tiring for her youngest child. Instead, she left Mary in the care of her oldest sisters and departed alone. After her mother left, Mary went outside to sit on the front steps with several neighborhood children, as she often did. They talked and played idly, passing the time in the late summer air. It was during this ordinary moment that something unfamiliar entered their view. A man appeared at the corner of the street, standing still and watching them. His presence drew attention not because he acted aggressively, but because he did nothing at all. After a brief pause, he motioned toward Mary, gesturing for her to come to him. One of the girls present, Caroline Dinglasser, immediately told Mary not to go. Yet despite the warning, Mary stood up and walked toward the man. The other children remained seated, frozen in place as they watched the man take Mary by the hand and lead her away. She did not look back. None of them followed. At the time, no one screamed. No one ran. What they witnessed did not yet resemble a crime. Only a moment they would later replay endlessly in their minds. When the church service ended, Mary's mother began her walk home. She had not gone far when her 2 eldest daughters came running toward her, their faces pale, their voices strained. They told her that Mary was gone, that a man had taken her away. At first, she struggled to comprehend what they were saying. Children wandered off sometimes. They returned, but as she neared her home, she saw neighbors gathering, voices raised, doors opening. Word had spread quickly along Orange Street. In neighborhoods like theirs, grief and fear were shared experiences. People poured into the street, asking questions, offering help, searching alleyways and vacant lots. Someone sent for the police. Lieutenant Whitcraft arrived and began coordinating the search. Officers questioned the children, canvassed nearby streets, and extended the search outward as night fell. By midnight, Mary had not been found. The search continued into the following day, expanding beyond the immediate neighborhood. Officers were dispatched throughout the city and into surrounding areas, but each passing hour brought no answers. For Mary's mother, the waiting became unbearable. Every possibility her mind conjured led to fear. By the evening of the 7th of September, hope had begun to erode. Early the next morning, on Tuesday, the 8th of September, a milkmaid named Carolyn Ledman crossed a vacant lot while making her rounds in the 19th Ward. The lot was a neglected space, scattered with rubbish and bordered by an old barn that served as a carpenter's shop. As she walked, she noticed something lying near the path. At first, she thought it was a child's dress. She turned back for a closer look and realized it was not clothing at all, but the body of a young girl. She was lying still, her small form partially obscured by debris. It was immediately apparent that the child was dead. Caroline ran for help, and within minutes, local residents gathered at the scene. The police arrived shortly afterward and secured the area. They quickly recognized the child as Mary Mormon. Her clothing and hair matched the description given by her family. Officers noted that the lot had been searched earlier, suggesting that Mary's body had been placed there only recently. She was transported to the mortuary, where an autopsy was conducted by Dr. Chapley. The examination confirmed that Mary had died on the day she disappeared. She had been strangled. Bruising on her neck, wrists, and arms indicated a struggle, and evidence showed she had been assaulted before her death. When Mary's mother was informed, neighbors gathered around her, offering comfort where none could truly exist. The news spread quickly through the city, igniting outrage and grief. The mayor announced a reward for information leading to the capture of the killer, a sum that was soon increased by contributions from private citizens. Suspicion fell heavily on anyone known for troubling behavior, particularly men who lingered near children. The value of reputation became painfully clear as rumors spread and accusations multiplied. Mary's funeral was held on the 10th of September at St. Boniface's Catholic Church. The building was filled beyond capacity. Neighbors, friends, and strangers alike came to pay their respects. The atmosphere was one of profound sorrow. 2 days later, an inquest concluded that Mary had been abused and murdered by an unknown individual. Despite continued efforts, the investigation stalled. Arrests were made, including that of a young barber named John Hanland, but no direct evidence connected him to the crime. He was released, and public frustration grew as months passed without resolution. More than a year later, in October of 1869, new incidents renewed suspicion. 2 young women were attacked while walking home, and the assailant was apprehended. Though released after compensation was paid, his behavior raised concerns. Weeks later, a 10-year-old girl narrowly escaped assault near a church. Her attacker was captured and sentenced to prison. Authorities soon discovered that the man used multiple aliases. His true name was John Hanland. While incarcerated, Hanland shared a cell with Michael Dunn, a convicted thief with a long criminal history. Dunn later approached police with a claim that Hanland had confessed to the murder of Mary Mormon, describing the crime in chilling detail. According to Dunn, Hanland admitted to strangling the child and later disposing of her body. Based on this testimony, Hanland was formally charged. The trial opened on the 31st of October in 1870 and drew widespread attention. The courtroom was filled each day as witnesses testified. Dunn recounted the alleged confession, while others described sightings of a man carrying a bundle or walking with a crying child. Mary's sister testified, as did her mother, whose grief left the courtroom silent. The defense attacked Dunn's credibility, presenting alibis and questioning the motives of law enforcement. Witnesses testified to Hanland's presence elsewhere that evening. After lengthy deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Appeals were denied. On the 11th of December, Hanland was sentenced to death. He maintained his innocence, condemning those who testified against him. His execution was scheduled for the 1st of February in 1871. In his final weeks, he showed signs of remorse, but never confessed. On the scaffold, he forgave his accusers and prayed for mercy. Little Mary Mormon's life had been brief, her death brutal, and the justice delivered afterward remains debated to this day. In a city accustomed to hardship, her story lingered, not as a solved mystery, but as a reminder of how fragile safety could be, even in the most familiar places. In the weeks that followed John Hanland's execution, Philadelphia did not find the sense of closure many had expected. While the law had reached its conclusion, questions continued to circulate quietly through the neighborhoods most affected by the case. Among working-class families along Orange Street and beyond, opinions remained divided. Some believed justice had been done, convinced by the testimony presented in court and the pattern of behavior attributed to Hanland in the years following Mary's death. Others, however, remained uneasy, troubled by the reliance placed upon a single jailhouse confession delivered by a man with an extensive criminal record and much to gain from cooperation with the authorities. The newspapers of the period reflected this tension. Editorials praised the perseverance of law enforcement in pursuing the case after so much time had passed, framing the conviction as a warning to those who preyed upon the vulnerable. Yet alongside these declarations were quieter columns expressing concern over the precedent such a conviction might establish. The legal community debated whether the standards of evidence applied during the trial had been sufficient, particularly given the weight afforded to Michael Dunn's testimony. Though the court had accepted Dunn's statements as credible, many readers could not ignore his history of theft, deception, and survival through manipulation. Mary Mormon's mother withdrew gradually from public view after the execution. The intense attention that had surrounded her family during the investigation faded, replaced by the slower rhythms of daily life. Neighbors continued to speak of her with sympathy, but grief in the 19th century was often borne privately, without the language or rituals that might offer relief. The loss of her youngest child had altered her irrevocably. Those who knew her recalled that she aged quickly after Mary's death, her posture stooped by sorrow that never fully lifted. For Mary's siblings, the memory of that September afternoon remained sharp. Caroline Dinglesser, who had warned Mary not to follow the man, would later speak of the guilt she carried into adulthood, despite knowing she had been only a child herself. Others who had witnessed the abduction remembered the silence that followed, the moment when fear took hold too late to change the outcome. In later years, parents in the neighborhood used Mary's story as a cautionary tale, reminding children never to follow strangers, even those who spoke gently or appeared familiar. The case also influenced policing practices within the city. Public criticism of the initial investigation had been severe, and in response, authorities sought to present the conviction as evidence of reform and resolve. Greater emphasis was placed on patrols near schools, churches, and playgrounds. Though these measures offered reassurance, they could not undo the sense of vulnerability that had settled into the community. For many families, the belief that danger could enter their lives without warning became an enduring reality. Legal scholars would later revisit the trial as an example of the challenges inherent in 19th-century criminal justice. The reliance on circumstantial evidence, the absence of forensic techniques now considered standard, and the social pressure exerted by public outrage all shaped the outcome. Some argue that Hanland's history of violent behavior toward women and children established a pattern too significant to ignore. Others countered that patterns alone could not substitute for proof beyond reasonable doubt. The debate reflected broader tensions at the era, as courts struggled to balance evolving notions of justice with limited investigative tools. Mary Mormon's name gradually receded from headlines, but it did not disappear entirely. Her story resurfaced periodically in discussions of child safety, crime prevention, and the moral responsibilities of communities. Each retelling emphasized different aspects of the tragedy, sometimes focusing on the brutality of the crime, sometimes on the failures that allowed it to occur. Rarely did these accounts dwell on Mary herself beyond her role as a victim. Yet those who had known her remembered a child who laughed easily, who loved simple games, and who trusted the world around her because she had been given no reason not to. In examining cases like Mary's, historians often caution against the temptation to seek neat conclusions where none truly exist. The legal process provided an ending, but it did not restore what had been lost. Whether John Hanland was guilty beyond doubt, or whether the truth lay buried beneath flawed testimony and incomplete evidence, is a question that cannot be resolved with certainty. What remains clear is the profound impact of the crime on a family, a neighborhood, and a city still learning how to protect its most vulnerable members. As the years passed, Philadelphia continued to grow and change. Streets were renamed, buildings replaced, and the physical landscape of Orange Street transformed beyond recognition. Yet beneath these changes, the memory of Little Mary Mormon endured, woven into the city's long and often troubled history. Her case stands as a reminder of the fragility of justice in an age before modern safeguards, and of the lasting echoes left behind when innocence is taken too soon. In the end, Mary's story is not solely one of crime and punishment, but of a moment when an entire community was forced to confront its limits. It reveals how quickly trust can be shattered, how grief can unite strangers, and how the search for accountability can lead both to resolution and to lingering doubt. Long after the courtroom emptied and the scaffold was dismantled, the questions raised by her death continued to resonate quietly, shaping how future generations understood the cost of vigilance, the weight of testimony, and the enduring human need for justice, even when certainty remains just beyond reach.